It's been good to watch you all play today. So what we're going to do is go a little bit deeper in the next half hour, if you can hang around. We've got Dr Anthony Sive here. Anthony's actually a C-suite executive. He's a pragmatic strategist, right into cultural transformation, business turnaround and business growth. One thing Anthony's very passionate about is manufacturing in Australia. He actually achieved a degree in mechanical engineering over in South Africa, and he went on to get his doctorate in philosophy. Very extensive career he's had throughout Australia in manufacturing and other places. He's worked for companies like Boral, Canrock Advisory, Southern Group Steel, and NEPEAN Building Infrastructure. And he's currently the Executive Managing Director of InfraBuild at the moment. So I'd like to say welcome, Anthony. It's great to have you on board here, mate. But I've worked with you, Anthony, known you for over 6 years now. And I've been privileged to watch you actually turn around businesses in Australian manufacturing, because there's a deep mindset in Australian manufacturing that we just can't compete as manufacturers on a global scale in Australia. You know, we've seen what happened to the car companies and the likes. They've all packed up and gone offshore. And it's created a deep-rooted mindset that you just can't be competitive on a global scale in manufacturing. I know, Anthony, one of the plants that you had that I worked with you closely for a couple of years, everyone said, shut the gates, you're dreaming. You can't compete. Your costs are currently 3 times higher than China, and they've got a quicker lead time than you. Shut the gates. But you were adamant that you could compete against China. You went on that journey. You not only come out the other side of the journey shining, it's led to the Chinese actually now come out to Australia to see what the bloody hell you've done with your plants in Australia, because your conversion costs are now cheaper than China. You've reduced them by a factor of 3. But not only that, your safety record and your quality actually is better than China as well. So, Anthony, I'd like to hear a bit about your story. You know, like a lot of people say, really? You're manufacturing in Australia and you're distinct? So, Anthony, just linking a few things maybe we've spoke about today, would you mind sharing your story with us? How did you do it, and what did you do to prove that manufacturing can actually still thrive in Australia?
Thanks, Luke, and thanks for the introduction, and great to be here. I think the standout thing for me was to realize that the people who actually do a job know more about the job than anyone else will. So for me to kind of come in and say, I know how to fix it, is foolish. I think the answer is in the people, because they do the job every day. And really the important thing was to get them to understand that it's up to them to really think through, how could we run it better? How could we make manufacturing in Australia successful? How could we make that plant that was in Coffs Harbour, I think is the one you're talking about, successful? And the important thing for them is, you know, it's not that easy to get a job in Coffs Harbour. If we lose this plant, we lose our jobs. There's pretty hard to find something else. So it's important that we do something here. The challenge, though, is that in the past, if they'd spoken up, they were not listened to. And so eventually they stopped suggesting ways to make improvements. And I can remember there was one particular individual that was nicknamed Bluey, a giant of a man. He used to turn up at work and say absolutely nothing, do exactly what he was told and go home. And, you know, grunt once or twice during the day. And slowly, by convincing him that he could talk up, that he could give us his opinion and it was valued, and he could suggest ways that his job could change to be and improved, he started talking. And it was through the Blue Bus training that sort of opened him up to talking. And I think that what he said eventually is not only did it change his work life, but it changed his home life. So it's holistic. It's not just one thing or the other. It changed his ability to talk up and actually give his opinion, and for people to listen to him, and for him to be validated, for him to have the connections with people so he could talk. And I guess for him to be in control of the work that he did. He stopped turning up every morning and he started, you know, bringing his brain to work. And in a way, before he'd been told to leave his brain at the gate and do what he was told. And so people like Bluey made the change, not me. What I did was made sure that Bluey was in a safe place where he could speak up. And also no ideas were bad ideas. You know, we talk in the Blue Bus about excellent failure. So if you suggest something that doesn't turn out to be a good idea, that's not a bad thing, that's a good thing. So it's called an excellent failure. And so that's really, really, really important, that it came from the people, and the success of the place, the cost structure changed, the productivity improved massively, not because of what I did, but because of what the people in the plant did. And so, you know, my sense is manufacturing will be successful because people in Australia are smart and they love being given that opportunity to control their destiny. And if you give that to them, you know, they help you, they'll help make the place successful. So, you know, they made COFS the success it was. And what you've got to do is be consistent. So, you know, through thick and thin, through good times and bad, through the months where we weren't profitable, you don't lose your way and say, no, I've got to go down there and micromanage and get involved and, you know, get on the red bus, because that's not going to work. You've got to maintain that blue bus. You've got to keep listening, and it sometimes takes us a little longer. So I hope that gives you some insight into the cultural change driving the business improvement.
Yeah, certainly, Anthony. Thank you, because I know we could share a lot of stories. How what are those C connections? And there are people who are only fresh people in the business, fresh eyes, didn't have a lot of background in manufacturing or a massive skill set. But I know when you connected with some of those C connections, junior people, new people, they had a wealth of ideas and things they wanted to try, like you said, and didn't necessarily work the first time. But when you had that mindset that it's okay to fail and fail fast, we actually learn from failure. Because as we say in the Blue Bus, if you're not failing, you're not learning. If you're not failing, you're not moving forward. So I think that, you know, and that was one thing you did, was gave that elbow room to your people as well to actually have a go around here. So what I'd like to do is...
that's the really important point, is that failure has to be accepted. And in most organizations, failure, you know, when you're doing a performance review, you're all talking about you failed here and you didn't do this and you didn't, you know, you got to stop doing that. Performance reviews can't be about hammering people for failure. You know, failure is an indicator that people are trying. And in fact, having failures is a good thing. But on the flip side, I can also tell you that we had 10-time productivity improvement initiatives come from the shop floor. That's staggering. 10-time productivity improvement from the shop floor, ideas that came off the shop. So they don't just make little changes. Sometimes they come up with real gems that make a massive change. And your profitability just doesn't increase a little bit, it increases massively. Shop floor, not so the triangle has to be inverted. The CEO is at the bottom, not at the top.
Certainly there to support the people, not tell them what to do, as we say. Yeah, certainly, Anthony. Thank you. So what I'd like to do is open up the channels. Has anyone got any questions I'd like to ask Anthony? That's what it's about, making some connections here. We've got quite a lot of various businesses and people from different places. I'd just like to open up the lines, a bit of a freestyle chat. Feel free to ask Anthony a question direct, or if you'd like to send one of us coaches a message in the inbox because you might be feeling psychological safe, or it might be a curly question that you prefer us to ask, we're happy to do that for you. But just like to open up the channels and have a chat with Anthony and ask him what's going on, or whatever questions you got. So I'll open up the channels now. Feel free to go ahead, folks.
Anthony, it's Josie. Really interesting what you've been able to do with manufacturing in Australia. And as people say, you know, we can't manufacture, but it's great to see the success story and how you approached it. When you look at the team that you're working with at that particular plant, did you have people that you just couldn't get on board, that were too resistant? Did you lose people?
Sure, absolutely, you lose people, because there are people who just don't get on board, and it's would be naive to assume that everybody's going to come. But, you know, the assumption was everybody is, but there are people who just don't make it. And I think that's important, is that I took over the business and there'd been sort of rolling redundancies. And what I essentially said is that we're not going to make anybody redundant from now. Pretty bold statement. We're simply not going to do it. But that doesn't mean people aren't going to leave the organization, either on their own volition or because we've asked them to leave. Because you've got to come on this journey. We're going to make this place successful, and the people who work here want to. And if we find people who just don't, then we can't carry them. You know, they need to move on and go and find something else to do. And, you know, if it's not here, then there'll be a place. There's a place in the world for everybody, but maybe it's not here. So they certainly do. And I think that Luke, in fact, said to me, I expect the attrition rate here could be something like 30%, and that's about the number. So yeah, we absolutely will. And the other thing is what happens is the guys on the shop floor actually tell you who has to go. You know, they'll turn up and say, yeah, mate, this guy's just killing us. And it's surprising who they come up with. But they'll also, you know, they start working as a team, and somebody's not, you know, looking after the place. Pretty quickly they sort it out. And it goes to everything. You know, the cleanliness of the bathrooms changed completely. The place was a tip. You know, after that, people just didn't make a mess, and that they cleaned up after themselves. You know, the kitchen was never, you know, it's just because guys who don't want to clean up after themselves didn't last. You know, it went right to that. It went to everything. You know, the best of the transformations, when you go into the lunchroom, one of the questions is, what's different? And the answer is the wallets on the table. Because the guys will leave their wallets on the table in the lunchroom. Because what do you need your wallet for when you go to work in the factory? You don't. But you take it with you because you're worried that somebody will nick it if you don't. You know, the best transformations, the wallets are on the table, the mobile phones are on the table in the lunchroom. And when they come back, they're still on the table where they got left. It's not just making a contribution to the way you work, it's everything. It's a real shift in culture in every way. Some guys won't get there.
Yeah, certainly. And I remember that well. It took a little while to go through the honeymoon phase, if you like, up there, where people were struggling to find their voice. And they had to actually practice their voice a couple of times till they realised it was safe to speak up. They come up with a lunatic idea to restructure the shop floor, you know, the way you use the cranes and all those sorts of things, because it was often the junior people challenging the people that had set it up 10 years ago to work that way. So I think there's a lot of, they had to really feel that safety from yourself and their peers and everyone else before they could actually go somewhere else. But I think once everyone got a taste of that, the honeymoon phase was over. They said, this is the way the relationship's going to be. I remember how many ideas were coming forward nearly every single day. And they weren't big things. They were the little things that make a difference. Those little 1%ers, you know, 1% here, 1% there. So, and in the end, I think everyone had their voice. Yeah. Any other questions anyone would like to ask Dr. Sive there?
Anthony, I want to, I was just looking at your background, and you've got behaviours, mindsets, values and culture. How, during that transformation, how did you then maintain that culture? So how do you make it sustainable?
I think that's one of the challenges is you can't, it can't be an idea of the week. You know, you absolutely, and it's hard work, particularly when things get difficult. You know, you can't get grumpy with people. You can't, you know, fly into the factory and start shouting at people. You've got to just stick with it because you've made that decision that you're going to let people talk. And they're not going to talk easily because, you know, it might be 30 years work career where they haven't been allowed to talk. You just got to stick with it. Really, really, really importantly, you've got to stick with it. And that's the only way to make it sustainable is it's the way we do things around here from today. And it's just, that's it. And we're not going to, and that's one of the challenges is if it's not from the top. And one of the things that happened in the Banking Royal Commission is the word culture came up. And so today, one of the things boards have to do is consider culture. And the reason is because it's got to be everybody in the organization, because if the board's not on board, not on board, and they mess up, then the guys on the front line just stop. And so you thought it was all going well, and then suddenly the guys on the front line stop talking. You say, why? Because the board's not on board. It's everybody. And that's the real challenge, is how do you get everybody? And so in fact, the Blue Bus training in any session, and it's kind of 18 people, do what's called the Edge, which is a 2-day kind of introduction and getting you started. And the guys can talk more eloquently about the program than I can. But one of the really important things was to make sure that in any one of those groups of 18, everybody was represented in the group. So there were frontline workers to the board. And so the frontline guys saw the board doing the same training, and you'd be in a group of 6, and there could be the chairman of the board and the floor sweeper from Coffs Harbour doing the training and doing the same thing, and having to do the same plays and having to discuss why is this blue behavior and why is this red behavior. And so it's got to be pervasive, and that's the only way to maintain it. As soon as senior guys jump ship, you lose everybody else really quickly.
Certainly. Just on that, I think it's one little story I could share about Anthony, because my background's mining and manufacturing, but many years in there. What do you think most regular workers do? Because the reality is the frontline workers that are under a lot of stress as we involved, when they see a managing director or a CEO walking onto the shop floor or out into the pit, what's the mindset of most workers, do you think, of frontline workers? They get really excited and wave to the CEO and the managing director? Or do you think they're starting to think, oh no, if I've got my earplugs, my gloves, I've done my pre-start check, I'm not going to get pinged? I think a lot of you would probably agree that a lot of our frontline leaders, when they see a managing director or a CEO come on their site, they're thinking, oh dear, what are they doing here? And they go into that defensive mode because that psychological safety has gone out the window. But the interesting thing, Anthony, whenever you went to site, and I went to site with you, the first thing you do is you'd say, no, we're not having a coffee, we're going to walk the floor. You get out there and walk the floor. And I was always surprised at the connections you had. You were able to talk about people's wives, their kids, what they did as a pastime. And as a result, when you walked out on the floor, people actually down tools. They got this big smile and they started waving and walking towards you. Whereas my understanding of manufacturing mining is you see the boss come and you get really busy all of a sudden and turn your back to them. So that way, if I don't make eye contact with them, you won't talk to me and I can't get pinged doing the wrong thing. Was that something you did consciously? Because I've seen it go the other way a lot. Was that something you did consciously, or is it part of the model, do you think, to turn those C connections today? Or you share a bit about that with us?
Absolutely. It's you got to, to show that you're listening, and also give them time to talk. A plant I ran in Sydney had a high Vietnamese community and a large number of Vietnamese people working, and a lot of them, their English wasn't brilliant, and then it's noisy and you're wearing earplugs, and so communication's not that easy. And the thing is, you just got to sit and listen. You got to stand there and ask them to tell you what they think, but listen, and then make sure if you don't understand that you ask them again to explain it. And eventually you do understand it, and you get some real insights. And go, wow, I didn't realize that was going on. I just didn't understand. And this guy tells you stuff, and wow, that's unbelievable. And that, and then next time he sees you, he wants to tell you some more, because he didn't tell you. And I always say to him, if there's something pressing that you want to talk to me about, you know where to come and find me. And in fact, when I started, everybody in the senior ranks had their own office, and I made the whole office open plan, not because I like open plan, but because I wanted to make sure that the guys on the shop floor knew if they wanted to come and see me, there was no door or no wall in the way. They knew where I was. And I'd say to them, do you know where I sit? And they'd go, yes. I said, so you can walk up there and come and talk to me. And they'd grab me up the carpet and stuff on their way in. And that was great, because at least they were coming to talk, and we didn't mind the floor, getting grubby for that sort of thing. Just mindful of the time, I wanted to share with people on the call why I've put the 2 slides I've put as the background. On the right, the organization, this is something that people introduced to right at the beginning of the cultural transformation, and Luke gave the first session and basically said to people, okay, Anthony Sive's no longer got the checkbook for the company, he's the CEO, we've taken the checkbook away, we've given you the checkbook. You can do anything, you can spend your money anywhere, and I want you to write down what do you want to do, and then I want you to take the post-it note you've written it and stick it on which one of these 3 spaces you think things need to, where the work needs to be done, what needs to change. And what happens is most of the post-it notes go above the line. I think systems, processes, strategy, tool, skills, and tactics, those are the areas that need to change. And nobody thinks about putting a sticker on the culture. And the whole idea is then to say to them, is that a blind spot? That in fact, the place that needs to change is the 3rd space, the cultural space. That's really where the transformation from being unsuccessful to being successful will come from. And the frustration was that in some, Coffs Harbour tended to work pretty well, but in other parts of the business, we really, really struggled to get people to understand the 3rd space. And I think the insight that I got is really that there's a pathway to cultural transformation, that you can't just tell people the 3rd space is important. They've got to come to it. And so what I've done is, on the other side, I've kind of used the 3 spaces differently. I basically said above the line, and I've called it strategy, structure, execution. Call it the hardware, which again, that organization part, above the line is hardware, below the line, software, culture. Put in this 2x2 matrix. And clearly what we want to do is get from where we are, which is in the bottom left corner. And you're always in the bottom left corner. It doesn't matter how good you are. You're looking to improve. And you want to improve both the hardware and the software. And the challenge is, how do you get from the bottom left to what's the pathway to get from the bottom left to the top right? And one of the reasons why it didn't work, and spent a lot of time trying to understand, why is it that in this factory, we just can't seem to get the cultural transformation we're looking for, whereas in other factories it seems to be working? Was there really that you have to start the journey going in the horizontal. You can't start with culture. You've actually got to look at the hardware, because if your workers say to you that the hardware is a problem, your strategy, structure, and execution are a problem, and you agree with them, then they blame that for the problems. And there's no reason, no need to change our behavior, because the other stuff's so crappy that behavior doesn't, and they know that. And so you've really got to make sure that you've got strategy, structure, and executional systems set up, not perfect, because they'll never be, but good enough where you can say to people, actually, our strategy, structure, systems, and execution are kind of good enough. That's not really the problem, that you can begin this cultural journey. So it's really, really important to look at that, look above the line as well, and just make sure that you haven't got massive gaps above the line, because if you have, people are not going to go on the cultural journey with you, because they can blame the stuff above the line and you agree with them. I mean, it's pretty hard to then say, no, we've got to go on this mindset transformation. So you've got to start going horizontally. And then people are going to say to you, oh, we can't do any better. You know, we've tried that and it's as good as it gets. And that's the indicator for starting your vertical journey. And it's a step journey. You don't get the cultural thing done in one step. They're small steps. So you go right, then, up, right again, and then up. And you kind of wait for people to say, we can't do better. And when they say to you, we can't do better, there's a cultural, there's a mindset change. That's the cultural journey. So you've got to step hardware first, then software. Hardware again, then software. So you've got to push improvements in strategy, structure, and execution until people say we're doing as well as we can. That's when you need the cultural shift. Then you move again to the right, then vertically. And as you get better and better strategy, structure, and execution, you can have much bigger cultural jumps. So the steps can increase in size vertically, whereas they've got to start large in the horizontal, small in the vertical. And that's really the challenge. And eventually every factory came on board. We transformed every place because we realized you got to start this journey on the horizontal, not on the vertical. So I hope that insight helps people understand that if you think you can't get cultural transformation, or if it's not working, you've got to look at the horizontal axis. And you've got to see, how do you get things to improve there first?
Excellent point. So we need all three spaces, and we've got to understand that balance, how they all interact, don't we? We often try to work in one space without understanding the effect it has elsewhere. Certainly great point there, Anthony. So in our final 5 minutes, folks, anyone else got a question they'd like to ask Anthony?
Sorry, Luke, Darren North had his hand up for quite a while, so I'm assuming, Darren, you got a question? You want to show off your fish, I'm assuming?
Well, yeah, I do. I'm not just a big fish. No, all I was just going to say is to Anthony and as well, one of the things that I've noticed as well in the past with this culture change, you have to be genuine, sincere when you approach. It's not just something that we've got to do to tick the box. You know, as a manager, you have to embrace it and be part of that change, not just drive that change and tell people it's what they've got to do. And I've come across many times when senior leaders and managers have not embraced that need for change or that new culture. It's just something that they've told employees to do. And I think that's really, really important when you're doing anything like this or going through that change.
Certainly, Darren, and I've seen you practice that in true colours yourself. Darren was part of the senior executive team at Newcastle Council when I first met him. And part of the training agreement is we say you're in Bali for 2 days, because otherwise people get called out of training, they're taking phone calls all day, getting disrupted. So Darren, being the lunatic leader he took it to the nth degree, and he dressed like he was in Bali. And he had the brightest, loudest clothes you could possibly imagine. He rocked up for 2 days. And a lot of those C connections that had heard stories about Darren and management, when he walked in dressed like that, it would create a lot of dissonance in their head. What's this manager doing? How come he's in a suit and tie? By the end of the 2 days, they'd made some deep connections, and it was all because the leader, showed that vulnerability up front. He showed he was human, he could be vulnerable and make those personal connections. As a result, Darren, we had a pretty amazing 2 days, and the relationships you made in those 2 days, I'm sure they're still lasting today. So yeah, it very much starts with the leaders.
Look, can I just backmark Coach Darren there for a second? A point you made. The most common question we get when we run these courses in organisations is, have management done this course? Everyone asks that, particularly the front line, because what they can detect, Australians are very good BS detectors. And when the manager's not authentic and they're not jumping on that bus heading in the same direction as the workers, just like Darren said, people pick it up really quickly. And if it's not authentic, like Anthony kind of talked about earlier, walking the floor and having that real connection, then it's not going to work. So people are really sensitive to that. So it's a great point, Darren.
Yeah, it's not just a question about have management done the course. Did management take part and enjoy the course?
Yeah, and actually live the principles after that. Yeah.
What we did is we made sure management was actually on the course. Every course we ran, and we made sure that there was a vertical, or the hierarchy was there. So the guys didn't have to wonder if management had done the course. They saw you there, and for management, it was an obligation. Everybody had to do the course, everybody. So in the end, if they have you be at 100%, every single individual, there wasn't anybody who didn't get to go. And also, it's all about a common language. And so saying something like, which bus are you on today, becomes ubiquitous. Everybody knows what that means from the top to the bottom. And that's, you've got to, if you look behind Luke, there are a whole lot of slides, little pictures. And every one of those little pictures tells a story. And the guys who work at NEPEAN Building and Infrastructure can tell you exactly what every single one of those little pictures means. Doesn't matter which position they play in the whole organization. Every single one of them knows every single picture. It's in the lunchrooms in NEPEAN across the company. And if you ask somebody, what does it mean? And often, if we had a problem, we'd stand in the lunchroom and look at that board and say, well, which one of those is the problem that we're trying to solve for? And it's on the board. The problem's on the board. We can solve our problems by looking at that board, because every single person understands every single word and every single picture, and they can explain it in detail. And there's a day's discussion in each one of those eventually. And then you can go back and learn it more again, and you actually get deeper and deeper into understanding what it really means. I think the other important thing, and I know time's really, really short, is none of this is reinventing the wheel. This is just good business practice. There's nothing unique about culture. It's just about letting everybody understand and share, because they're all smart, capable people. And when you put the whole team together and get the best out of everybody, that's what culture is all about. Just making sure everybody's got an equal voice to share.
Yes. It's been a pleasure to work with you over the years, Doctor. I know you've still got a lot left in front of you, a lot of changes to make. And I guess one of the key changes, just summarising what Coach Adrian said there, is when we work with organisation, executive leadership teams, one of the questions we ask is, are you ready to sign off on this program? And they jump here, we're ready to sign off. And we say, well, it's not going to work. This program's not going to work, because cultural transformation has got to be something we do together. We can't have you as leaders signing off. When you put your signature there, we need you to sign on. This is a journey we're all going to embark on together. We don't sign off and we get others to change, because we've all got blind spots. We're all part of that journey. And it's been a pleasure to work with you, Doctor. I hope you continue to do some amazing work. I had a question come through the chat function. I would like to ask you, Doctor. Everyone's always keen to expand our own knowledge and reading. What's the best book you've read in recent times, and why do you think we might benefit or like it?
Oh, there's a fellow called Daniel Kahneman who won a Nobel Prize for behavioral economics. And he wrote a book called Thinking Fast and Slow. And if you haven't read it, it's the best business book you can read. But he's just written a new book called Noise, which takes blind spots to a whole new... And Thinking Fast and Slow is all about blind spots. But that's the psychology and the fact that people don't make the best decision given their next dollar, which is an economic assumption. And so I think, Daniel Kahneman's Thinking Fast and Slow, and then followed by his most recent book called Noise, really, really, really important. It won't change your work life, it'll change your whole life.
Love it, Doctor. Well, folks, I'm going to thank you all for your time. We're out of time there, but part of the session, the Blue Bus, is reach out and connect. If you'd like to talk more to any of the coaches, contact us through Connect. The same as if you've seen players here today that you've enjoyed listening to, or you'd like to connect with the Doctor, he's always up for a chat. I can tell you that. He loves connecting with new people, always learning. So feel free to reach out, continuing the journey. But folks, it's been an absolute pleasure today. I want to thank each and every one of you for playing hard, and stay connected. As we say in the Blue Zoom room, we're not isolated, we're always connected. Been a pleasure seeing you all smile, folks. One last smile before you all go. Oh, I love those smiles. Have a great day, everyone. It's been an absolute pleasure.